Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our February edition of our Fireside Chat series. I and my co-host Tom Gunderson are thrilled to welcome Rachel Rockwell to talk about Roundtable RX, the matchmaking wonder of drugs in Minnesota. Actually, putting those words together sounds a little more controversial than it is, but it's still pretty super awesome. As folks know, this is something that we do at the Carlson School to support the Medical Evaluation Laboratory. Any new ideas, please send them over. And also our brand new program at the Carlson School in the medical industry, our Global Medical Industry MBA designed for students overseas that want to get involved in the healthcare space. So we have actually, for those who know folks overseas that are in the med tech or any space like that, we have scholarships up through April 1, $10,000 off tuition, which is a pretty good deal, but you got to get your applications in soon. So just Google Global Medical Industry MBA and it'll pop right away. So just to explain our path tonight, or this afternoon, we are going to start off with Tom asking some questions, and I'll come in to Rachel, and then we'll do general Q&A. All right, as our tradition, 30 minutes of this is on the record, meaning it's recorded, and then 30 minutes will be off the record. But of course, use your, what is truly off the record now, particularly, Putin listening and things like that. It's just a whole different world. So I just want to put that time stamp on this thing because this might be an important day. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to my co-host with a fabulous new camera that he has that picks up so many more colors than we ever saw before in these previous podcasts. Tom Gunderson.
Thanks, Steve. So before we get started, I just wanted to note that one of the things that Steve and I try to do is to get interesting speakers. And I think we've done a good job of that to date. And you will see today again that we have an interesting speaker, but this one's got a little bit different tone to it. And I just wanted to highlight that. And that is, I'm a big believer that the healthcare and medical community in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota is bar none better than any in the world. And because of that, one would hope and aspire to having philanthropy and giving back to the community be number one in the world. I'm not sure it's there. There's some studies out there that say the Twin Cities give less to healthcare organizations. But one of the ways we can give is to give our time. And many of the people that I see on the call here do that. And Rachel's just a prime example of somebody who's not just saying, well, gee, expensive drugs, isn't that a problem? Let's write a paper. No, she's actually donating her time and getting something done. So with that, Rachel, if you would, tell us a little bit about you and how you got involved with this project.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Tom. And thank you, Steve and Jessica, for having me as a speaker. So as mentioned, I'm Rachel Rockwell. I'm a pharmacist. I also have my master's in public health. I am currently the pharmacist in charge with Roundtable RX, which is Minnesota's medication repository program. Basically, we accept unused medications and then check them for safety and then redistribute them to people in need in Minnesota. Currently, I'm fully volunteer with Roundtable RX. Essentially, whenever I'm not working as a community pharmacist at Hy-Vee right now, I've been a community pharmacist for 5 years. Whenever I'm not at work, I'm pretty much always volunteering with Roundtable RX. I got involved actually couple years ago, July of 2020, I was looking for a project to complete for just that final step in my Master's of Public Health. And one of my mentors at the University of Minnesota Duluth College of Pharmacy recommended I get in contact with Rowan Mann, who is one of the co-founders of Roundtable RX. Recommended I get in contact with them because they were looking for a licensed pharmacist, and said, great, sounds like a great project, I'll work with them. Well, the rest is history. I'm well over done with that project. So Roundtable RX has really become a major passion for me, and I'm so glad that you are all here today to hear more about it.
Thanks. Maybe one of the things that's interesting to me is the whole startup kind of phase for this, where nothing like this was around until you guys sort of made it happen. Um, the basic understanding I have is there are people who need drugs who can't afford them. There's some data out there, I think, that say that 40% of prescriptions go unfilled because of cost. And whether that's a correct number or not, it's a large percentage, right? And yet there's seems to be in the land of plenty of drugs and pharmaceuticals out there. How do you bridge that gap right now?
Yeah, so we exist to, as you said, close or help close that gap in medication access and availability for all Minnesotans, not just those that can afford it, and also not just those that have excellent healthcare insurance. We are able to do that by, thankfully, students at the University of Minnesota, the co-founders of Roundtable RX, got legislation passed and laws passed for a medication repository to exist in Minnesota. I believe that was back in 2018, roughly, that the law got passed. So we are able to take medication donations predominantly from long-term care facilities, which are major, unintentionally, but they create a lot of waste in pharmaceutical products just through their services, because if a patient has a change in medication, well, that medicine can't go back to the pharmacy, unfortunately. It just can't be accepted back into inventory. So ultimately it goes to waste. Well, now that the law exists for a medication repository, i.e. Roundtable RX to exist, we're able to take that medication waste and repurpose it, get it redistributed to patients in need. And that's at no cost to the patient and at no cost to the provider, pharmacy, clinic that's providing the medication to the patient and that identifies that patient.
So there's a problem out there and we're solving it in this specific way for these specific drugs and people. Is this, I'll give you a setup question here. Is this really because of the lack of socialized medicine, or is this because the way, put it more positive, is this just a side effect of the healthcare system that we have in this country?
Good question. So the issue of people being unable to afford their medication or unable to access it is due to a multitude of issues, whether they don't qualify for insurance, or maybe they decided to get that high deductible plan and then they have a crisis happen in the middle of the year that they weren't expecting, all sorts of things. But basically we exist, Roundtable RX, as another resource for patients in the US in our healthcare system that are having issues obtaining their medication because of that financial barrier. So I'm sure a lot of people know all about like the coupons that exist for patients to use on their prescriptions. GoodRx is constantly advertising. I'm sure most people have heard of GoodRx. So there's coupons out there. Sometimes doctors' offices or clinics will have samples to give to patients, but at some point, either the samples run out or the GoodRx coupon, especially with like brand name drugs, things are really expensive. Those still just don't close those barriers in healthcare, the healthcare gaps when it comes to medication accessibility. So we exist as yet another resource to help those patients, to provide those medications for those patients. And additionally, we're also being a more green source for obtaining medications.
So instead of throwing them away and having them get into the groundwater in some way or another, they're actually getting used.
Exactly. And being someone that's very environmentally conscious, that's also, in the back of my mind, it's not our primary goal, but it's one of the other driving factors for why I am so passionate about Roundtable.
Right. Steve, what questions do you have for Rachel?
Thanks, Tom. So I actually, it'd be helpful, Rachel, just to frame this for people, like how helpful this could be, because I think one thing that, in just learning more about this, and full disclosure, I'm on the board of this group, but it's nonprofit. I don't get paid. I'm totally volunteer, but I think it's wonderful. But I mean, it's not like you're just helping somebody out with $5 or $10. I mean, there's some people that have chronic conditions, that have major expensive, basically drugs they need to take just to be, functional. Can you give just a framework on like what the scale is that you're actually helping out at the individual person level, from at least the range of what's there?
Yeah, so I can actually tell you right after this call, I'm going to be going into the repository because we just got an order from a partner clinic for a drug called Eliquis for a patient. Eliquis, it's brand name only. It's a vital medication to help prevent heart attack and stroke for people that are at high risk with certain underlying conditions for it. 30-day supply of that could cost anywhere from, depending on insurance, well, let's just pretend there's no insurance and it's just coupons and whatnot, somewhere between like $150 to $300 usually for like a 30-day supply of Eliquis. And after this call, I'm going to be packing up a donated bunch of the Eliquis and getting that shipped off to a patient so they can have it in their hands in just a couple days.
Awesome. So I guess I remember it's not, you can't really do everything. So talk a little bit about who you can't serve. I know because it's a lot of it's some of it dependent upon, it's not every single pharmaceutical product. There are some that actually have limitations in terms of, at least at present, what you can do.
Yeah, so we can do a large majority of medications. We can accept those into our inventory and distribute them to patients. I would say there's a pretty small portion of medicines that we can't accept. Unfortunately, a lot of those are the really expensive drugs. So anything that requires refrigeration, we can't accept. Therefore, insulin is not available to us to provide to patients. However, if you're not familiar, Minnesota does have a really good program for insulin. If you know someone that's struggling to afford it, it's called I think it's the Alex Smith Act. That's completely off topic, but we can't accept insulin anyhow. So a lot of other injectable drugs that require refrigeration. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Humira. We might not carry that. We might also not carry really specialty drugs for rare hereditary conditions. Part of that is because, one, they just don't get donated. Two, there's not a huge demand. And then three, a lot of those drugs, either a patient has to apply for a program through the manufacturer, those sorts of things. However, we do still have a ton of medicine. We have pretty much anything that you need for basic chronic conditions that are really common: diabetes, high blood pressure, mental health conditions. We also have really expensive things that are injectables, such as EpiPens, that I was just filling a prescription today for a patient that the EpiPen, even with insurance, is $150. We have those, again, free of cost to the patient and to the clinic. And then we also have other injectable medications. We just can't carry anything that requires refrigeration. Additionally, we're not able to carry or provide anything that is a controlled substance. So no opioids, no Adderall, those types of things.
So I know we talked about nursing homes are potentially a great partner to get stuff in, but talk a little bit about some of the new partners that you're dealing with on other firms. I know that there's some announcements that Roundtable has been excited about. So you get this opportunity to talk about them, and then we can record it and blast it forever and make sound clips.
Yes. So right now, because we've only been officially, like, our facility has only been open since December of 2020. We're all volunteer run except for one paid employee who's a project manager. We have, I believe it's 5 official partnerships. So we've got Seaward Pharmacy, which is in Minneapolis. We have Country Manor, which is a large pharmacy in Sartell, Minnesota. We have Essentia, which is a very large healthcare entity up in the Arrowhead region. They just started with us. They're piloting a program at one of their pharmacies, but they have every intention to spread out to the rest of their clinics, or throughout all of their clinics and pharmacies. We are currently like within days, if not hours, of signing on Hy-Vee, which is close to my heart because I worked hard to get them on board because of course I work for them. But Hy-Vee, which is a large retail chain, so hopefully at some point we'll be in all Hy-Vees in Minnesota, or at least a good number of them. And then we're in serious conversations with Hennepin Health, which is formerly HCMC, which is a gigantic entity. A huge win for us here in the Twin Cities area. There's a few more, they're not coming to my head, but, oh, and then Kook Clinic. Kook Clinic and People Center. Those two are, I believe they're federally qualified healthcare facilities. So they work with a lot of patients that might be underinsured or uninsured, or maybe are non-residents to the US, so they don't qualify for insurance type of a thing. So they've been utilizing us quite regularly for their patients. Yeah, they've been an excellent partner. Right now, a lot of our clinics and partners are within the Twin Cities area, but our intention and our goal is to be able to provide our resource to all Minnesotans across the state, not just in the Twin Cities where I happen to live. We exist to help all Minnesotans. So we have every intention of reaching every corner of the state.
Awesome. One question, I'm going to toss it back to Tom. So you're trained as a clinical pharmacist, correct?
Yep.
When did you know you were an entrepreneur?
I still don't think I'm an entrepreneur. I'm just doing it.
I might take the differ. The amount of zeal that you show talking about the contracts you just secured, I think you just defined the zeitgeist, if you will, of what an entrepreneur feels. At least when I have an entrepreneur, it's the same thing. Like, yes, we got the contract. But
well, I would say I'd be nothing without the team that we have at Roundtable RX, and that includes our board members, Steve. Yeah. But our whole team has just been wonderful. I'm just one member of our team.
Thank you.
I appreciate the kind compliment. I've never been called an entrepreneur before.
I think you deserve it. Over to you, Tom.
So for everybody on the call, these fireside chats, I think are just great because we learn new things. But you can tell everybody that you're in contact with that you were on a fireside chat and zeitgeist was used in the conversation. I just think that you made my day, Steve. I want to try and I'm less educated on this whole thing, Rachel, than I should be. And so thanks for educating me. But if I zero in on one of your examples, Eliquis, okay? We all know there's different types of drugs out there. If I get an infection, I take an antibiotic until it goes away and then maybe a little longer, and then that's it. I don't need the antibiotic anymore, right? Eliquis, you take twice a day for the rest of your life. So when you say after this call, you're going to deliver some Eliquis to a clinic, is that what it is? Where does the responsibility go for next month and the month after and 50 months down? Deal with that when it happens, or is there a plan?
That's a great question. So we are considered a wholesale, we're not a pharmacy. So I never really, other than them signing the form saying, yes, I want my medicine through Roundtable RX, I don't ever really know their circumstances unless they were to call me and divulge that information. If they wished, they could absolutely next month, or if I don't know if it's a 30 or 90-day supply, I'm going to say 30 just in case it's not a 90, but next month say that they are either, still uninsured, underinsured, or just need help obtaining or affording their medications. They could very well go into the clinic, go into the pharmacy, say, hey, I've got a couple of days left of my medication. I want to do that Roundtable RX business again. And then their clinic or their pharmacy or their provider will just shoot us another message. We'll get that prescription packed up again, and we could potentially exist to provide their medicine all year long. However, I will say, as a organization that exists on donated medications, it's hard for us to guarantee that we'll always have that med in stock. So most medicines that are really commonly used, and Eliquis happens to be one, we will pretty much always have it in stock. They could essentially utilize us for an entire year's worth of medication, or possibly even an entire lifetime. But if it's something more special or not used as frequently, like certain brand name health, mental health medications, we might only be able to supplement their annual expense for that medication, because they can get it from us for maybe a couple months, but then the next month we might not have it. And either they might have to go about getting a sample from their doctor's office, or, biting the bullet and paying that copay or that deductible on the insurance. But for a lot of medications, we are able to provide a full year's worth. But ultimately, the only thing we can guarantee is really to be a supplement for it. However, lots of howevers in this. We are doing a lot more partnership with more donors, more long-term care facilities, just more places that have medications that they would otherwise waste, getting them donated to us. So we anticipate our inventory growing substantially, hopefully along with our partnerships with clinics and pharmacies.
So thanks for that. I understand incrementally more, and I appreciate it. If I continue with the example and what you've said, first, I'm pleasantly, but still surprised that Eliquis, an on-patent drug that hasn't been out there that long, is something that you have a good supply for. And I'm glad it's out there for the people who need it. And I'm assuming, I think, if I remember my pharmaceuticals right, Xarelto is a similar drug. You don't play favorites, I'm guessing, on brands?
No, we actually get both. We have quite a bit coming in for Xarelto and Eliquis. Part of the reason we have so much coming in likely has to do with the fact that our source for the medication are long-term care facilities. A lot of times they're transitional care units. So maybe right after surgery or right after someone has a diagnosis of a stroke or something like that, they go into a facility, they're getting that Xarelto, that Eliquis. Well, then once they get either discharged or taken off the medication, or if they unfortunately expire themselves, that medication is wasted and then hopefully eventually ends up with us. But Eliquis and Xarelto are used for a lot of conditions, and unfortunately conditions that are pretty common. So we do get a steady supply, and they're one of the more recommended medications of other options.
And that kind of folds into my next question, is there somebody at that you work with that is looking at the data analysis to see if there's a matchup between supply and demand? So there's a lot of people who need blood thinners. There's a lot of blood thinners out there. Okay, that works. What about docs coming and saying, gee, I really need this, and it's not just a one-timer, but there's 10 of them from around the state asking this over a period of time? Do you then go out and search and try and find that drug, or do you just say, no, we're focused on what we've got, not trying to get more?
It's actually an interesting timed question. So recently the legislation did change to allow us to partner with other repositories across other states. However, the legislation and the Board of Pharmacy is still very prohibitive in our abilities to do that, because right now it's required that that other repository be licensed in Minnesota as a wholesaler, which is just not feasible at this time. So at some point, we would like to be able to partner with other repositories across the US, because we are not the only medication repository that exists. We hope to partner with other repositories in other states so that we can trade our resources. If I need more Eliquis because the doctors, prescribers, pharmacies I'm working with are wanting that Eliquis, but say Wyoming, they just hardly ever use it. However, they really want this mental health medication that we have a ton of. Well, then hopefully we can, swap inventory. And also, because we're so new, we haven't done a ton of dispensing. So there's not a whole lot of data for us to analyze yet, but at some point that is something that we will be doing. And in fact, we're currently seeking out a student to help us, hopefully on a project that they might need for a master's, PhD, something like that, to help us organize our metrics, statistics, just get a better idea of what kind of data we should be collecting in order to know these answers, anticipate these answers, and also direct us in the right direction as we grow, to make sure that we're being the most efficient, most effective as we can be with our time and limited resources.
Thanks. I'm just going to ask a pharmacist question, and then I'm going to toss it back to Steve. But on this whole demand side, let's forget supply right now, but on the demand side, if at Roundtable RX, you could wave a wand and have large supplies of a single drug that you don't have right now, what would that drug be?
Probably every inhaler under the sun. Inhalers are so expensive. There's so many out there. Right along, I feel like this is an Eliquis commercial, but right along with Eliquis and Xarelto, inhalers are our number one requested item from patients.
And hard to get?
They're not super predictable in what we can get, because a lot of our medications come to us in blister packs. So each pill is put into a bubble. Well, once someone opens an inhaler, we can't accept whatever's left in the inhaler. We can only accept a brand new inhaler, because I'm not going to give one of my patients a used inhaler. The people that obtain medications through Roundtable RX need just as high of quality as if you, I, or my mom or dad were to go to the pharmacy and get one from off the shelves of the pharmacy. So we strive to make sure that all of our medications are high quality. But yeah, inhalers, we don't have enough. We have a lot, but we don't ever have enough.
Got it. Steve?
So I'll close out the question. We have 2 minutes before we have to go off the record, but the thing that always intrigued me about all this was that, you know, you've more or less got created from state legislation, which is great. But when in hearing what you're describing about having, for lack of a better term, interstate transfer, sounds like I'll ask the question to you. Would Roundtable RX benefit from federal legislation that would essentially create interstate compacts?
Well, I think because we exist as a wholesale pharmacy, that would be great, but a lot of our existence, a lot of our work is dependent on the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy, and I'm guessing that's probably the situation with all other repositories.
Right.
They exist based on the, what's the word I'm looking for? The governing body of their pharmacy world in their state. So their Board of Pharmacy.
Yeah. So in many respects, it's not that dissimilar to, say, each state has its own medical society, and in terms of licensure rights for each state. And when people talk about like practicing medicine across state lines, it's the same thing. Like telemedicine gets into this sort of same issue too, but the states have to kind of consent to that, actually, to basically extend the licensure of Minnesota to Iowa or to Wisconsin or Florida for that matter. So interesting.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I guess federally, one nice thing would be, if, I suppose that still lands on the state, making it easier to give, I guess, wasted yet safe medications to repositories.
Right. I mean, so it's almost like it's, if you have something on stock and it's not moving in your stock already, at least there's a chance for it has like one last shot of something else to move it before it goes. So, I mean, you know, not to say that I ever get involved in writing legislation, but I mean, it's that could be pretty narrowly defined actually to maybe work, but that's a good transition to our off the record conversation. So for those here, we are going to transition now to, and thank you, Rachel, for doing this, and thank you, Tom.